I figured it was probably about time I actually did commentary for one of these runs. So this is Vividlope any percent with items, and I'll explain more as to what the actual meaning of the items usage is. But right off the bat of the start of this run, we're going to activate what's called short mode, which requires us to stand in this corner and hold left. You may notice that for a little bit of time there, I actually opened a different menu to change Cerise's color. The game will actually accept any left input while you're standing on that tile, so me opening that menu and changing colors actually does still count as holding left to activate short mode. So here we'll start with World 1-1. I'll do a little thing to skip the cutscene, and then I start by using one of the items to max out my my power gauge on the left-hand side. And the reason I do this is when you're at full power, the characters actually run at their maximum speed. So I will use it a lot in the early game here, where I'll just fill up the power meter instantly with one of the items. We go on to the next level, and every run, or every level, you'll see that same sort of skip at the start, and then early on you'll see me always using this max power. Here we pick up the stamp that allows us to just hit and break and flip over 9 tiles. This is the core mechanic of the game. When you're playing through levels, there's a certain amount of the tiles you have to flip colors, shown on the top left, and then that's what then you go into a overtime where you try to fill 100%. But since we're just trying to go fast, I instead will just walk back over tiles I've already completed, and doing so reduces your power gauge, and if it hits 0, then you fail out the extra challenge. So the goal of the run is basically fill the levels in, then just walk back over to empty your power meter, and just go on to the next level. These early levels, it's a lot of just optimal movement, using max power to speed your character up, and then just hitting the right things. So a lot of this is just very precise movement, and then just utilizing little tricks like pushing the little paint rollers there back into themselves to move them up, and we just move on to the next level. By enabling short mode, I only need to clear 5 levels out of the 15 per world, where normally it requires 12 levels to be completed, but enabling short mode drops that all the way down to 5. So the route is basically just designed around whatever levels are the fastest to complete, whatever have the lowest amount of percentage, and what have the best utilization of weapons, or items, rather. And there we go, we complete the first world, and now the second world unlocks. So the way the run works is we utilize the items, and the items work on a sort of system-wide. The items and your inventory are shared across all save files on the game. So even if you start a brand new file like I am here, I still have access to all the items that belong to just my computer's saves. Here we start making use of a different item called Impact that makes Cerise jump and then fills in a 3x3. The most optimal way to use this is to just jump into an area where there is going to be that full 3x3 painted in. This also allows her to deal damage to any enemies nearby that land in that same general area, like right there. For general movement, what you want to do is wiggle the D-pad up and down so that you're wiggling between 2 tiles, and then that'll allow you to paint over those 2 tiles, and then, like I said, backtracking. When we backtrack, we actually want to hold diagonally, because that each tile we walk back over is a knock on our power, and walking diagonally allows us to travel over multiple tiles much faster. Here we're just walking around using Impact to fill in tiles pretty quickly when these are already 3x3 grids. If I'm unlucky with the timing, then I will just walk around and make jumps. But this is one of the levels that is surprisingly very easy to just lose time on. And then you'll notice my timer at the bottom, I have splits for every single level. That's just so I know where I'm doing on levels. And then here I do a little bit of a safe strat where I walk over to activate that enemy. That's just because I've died so many times to that enemy that I'm just sick of dying to them, so I will go ahead and just trigger their movement a little bit early and waste a slight bit of time, but to make sure I don't die. And then I don't have access to all the items. The items I'm using are just the ones that you get access to. When you finish worlds, you unlock extra items in the item menu. And so early on, we only have access to like the 3 that you see there. But by the time we reach the final few worlds, we have access to every item in the game. And those are all items we can use on command. So a lot of the routing for this game has been based around what weapon or what items we have available, what levels make the best use of them, and then just sort of working around that. And then the levels also have their own item drops. Like right there, picked up Dash. Dash is not something I can use on command yet, but it's just an item that appears in the level. And then here's the first instance of a level where there's undos. Levels like this, where if you backtrack over tiles you've already colored over, it'll undo it, but one of the items we have access to will allow us to avoid undoing tiles that we backtrack over. So we just utilize that, and then just go wild. It only does it for 20 steps though, so you have to be very careful with your backtracking unless you want to just keep spamming the good shoes item. Then going into this world, you will see this. I'm skipping a cutscene. There's just a little like animated intro, or like sort of like a cutscene like you would see in a cartoon where they have some sort of little interaction. Here we get access to the dash ability, which is a dash like you saw previously, just jots you forward, allows you to kill enemies, and makes you move a lot faster. Despite the fact that it's purely like a movement and allows you to deal damage, it is something that it isn't actually even the greatest item in the game, and we will see what the best item in the game is later. But for general movement in this world, the dash is superior in a lot of ways, and it shows up pretty often here. This is a level where I made a little bit of a mistake. There's a point in this level where the stamp will drop, and we don't want to pick up the stamp because then it just replaces our dash with the stamp instead. So I tried to move out of the way of it and ended up wasting a bit of time by just trying to avoid picking it up. And yeah, there we go. You waste a bit of time trying to avoid picking it up, because if I pick up that stamp, then I have to re-equip the dash to undo it. Now this is one of the levels that I definitely should work on a good reroute for it, because in optimal pathing for this level is still very tricky just to figure out what exactly to do. But this does give us the first look at an item that does become very abusable later, and that's called the wrap paper. The wrap paper here just paints in a straight line for us, and even in some levels, where we'll get later in, some levels require you to go over tiles multiple times to get them to the correct color. Wrap paper will actually go and flip them over to the exact color they need to be, so it allows us to save time where we would have to backtrack over tiles multiple times. And then here again, we're just utilizing the dash to speed through areas. We go on these movement tiles, it'll actually allow us to sort of phase through enemies and avoid getting hit, but I still don't really risk it. I still will try to kill or avoid just like the tiles pushing me into the enemies, just because I don't want to have that one-off chance where it will just, the movement ends just as I touch the enemy, and then I lose a life, and then it's just wasting time. You'll also notice we get access to another item there called Bomb. This just kills all the enemies that are on the level at that time. We can use this to, if we're feeling like if there's an enemy in our way, we will use that. But it's also another trick we can utilize where using the bomb gives us iframes for a bit, so we're like invulnerable for a little bit after using bomb. So we can utilize that to step through insta-kill tiles or avoid some hazards. It's not used in the run, but it is something that can be used. So a lot of this run is really down to the playing levels optimally, knowing the levels, knowing layouts. In this case, this world added invisible tiles. So there are tiles that aren't visible normally and only become visible once you walk over them. Or the game will actually hint at tiles being in certain areas, but if you walk over to them, you can see a brief. one to the route because this level ended up being slightly faster than a level that was notoriously obnoxious because we had to double back over tiles, and then it also had undo tiles, or it would undo tiles, so it was just a nightmare to play the level. So this one was worked in because it ended up being faster, and it's just a whole lot easier to do. Here's one of the levels I actually like. I don't do it very well in this run, but normally this is one of my favorite levels to do, just because it is a good utilization of dash and shows how fast dash can make certain levels like this, because we're just utilizing a bunch of straight lines, and that's what dash does pretty well. Not the best example of this level done, but it is one of the more fun levels. This was also another one. Here we'll see these little tiles that are along the outside there. You can't really see it here because I avoid them, but those are tiles where it's like a sticky tile, where if you're standing on them, Cerise can't jump, and so impact is an item that requires her to jump to use. If I was on those tiles, I would not be able to use impact. So we use impact around the tiles so we can still paint them in, and then avoid not being able to use the item. And then this level is a good example of hidden tiles. So we just dash around to uncover the tiles. We also get access to another item called the paint balloon. This one we will see in a little bit, but it's basically an item where you just chuck a bunch of random paint balloons, and wherever they land, they'll just fill in tiles for you. It's not very useful because it goes only so far, and it doesn't really paint a whole lot. In comparison to like things like impact or stamp, they just don't do a whole lot, and so it's not very favorable to use them. But I use them at the start of this one to just chuck a bunch, and you can get an idea of what it looks like. So just throwing them around, yeah, they don't paint a whole lot for you, but in this level, it's just a giant ring that we work around. So just having a bunch of extra tiles painted makes it a little bit easier. Here we use a bit more of that stutter step I mentioned earlier, of just jiggling the D-pad to go up and down a tile. That way we can get we can cover both, like, 2 lanes of tiles while using very minimal input. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, anytime we're doing the wrap-up, we always want to move diagonally, because we can backtrack over multiple tiles that way. And then we can end the power meter and then just move on from there. The first level here that we'll do is going to be a good example of what's called wrap paper strafing. The wrap paper, if you hold the item button and then just move, Cerise will strafe while throwing all of the paper. Throwing all the paper. And we use that quite a bit because it is a great way to move in a straight line and then just get the wrap paper out. Wrap paper is one of the better items in this game. Actually, it's one of the best in the entire game, which we only will get access to using on our own after this world. Here we do get access to the stamp, which is very useful because it also does a 9x9, and then it also damages enemies, so kills things for us, and then, like I said, does a 9x9. So it's very useful, especially in this level where everything's just a 9x9 laid out, or I say 9x9, I mean a 3x3 laid out, so it's just a perfect level for the use of this item. And then you'll notice, like I said, I have 99 of every item. That's just because after I do a run, I go back through and restock on all the items between attempts. And then you'll see, when I complete a level, it's only for a brief second, but you'll see the currency I have in the top right. That is also shared across save files. So here we get the shield item, which is one of the items we cannot use on command, and that just allows us to tank a hit from an enemy, because this game does have only one-hit deaths. This level is another one where it has the undo, And this is a level where a lot of routing has been very difficult to do to figure out a good optimal way to play through this level. You would think with it just being so much open space, it'd be relatively simple, but this is one of the levels I've spent the most amount of time just trying to figure out a good path to make it through here. Because a good chunk of the level is separated by those like X tiles right there. Stepping on those is an insta-kill, so we try to avoid going onto them, but a good chunk of the tiles are above there, and it's just been a matter of trying to figure out a good optimal way to cover all the ground down here without having to actually risk going up there. And this is a level where we actually utilize a thing about the dash that I haven't mentioned, and that is the dash does give you slight invulnerability. So I mentioned earlier that it does allow you to kill enemies that you go through, but it provides invulnerability as well. And then there's an unfortunate death. Deaths will take away a life and then also tank your power meter back down to nothing. So if you use one of the items to maximize your power, if you die, then you have to redo it. In this case, we use dash so much that I don't bother to refill the power. After the first couple worlds, it's not really worth it to spend an item to maximize your power, because we'll have better ways of movement. So you can utilize dash, or after this, we'll start using the wrap paper, and wrap paper will fill our power meter pretty quickly. So it's better to just use those than to waste time spending the menuing to use an item just to give us max power, when just playing through the level optimally like we're going to will already give us all the power we need. So here we'll see more use of wrap paper strafing, along with the good shoes, which prevent us from undoing. So we'll go through and just use wrap paper strafing, because this is a similar layout to the other level where I mentioned that routing it's kind of difficult. This is the exact same level, except now it's a different color, and now we have wrap paper. If we had access to wrap paper earlier, that other level that's this exact same layout would be so much easier, but unfortunately we don't. And then here we do essentially the same thing. We put on good shoes to avoid undoing, and then we just wrap paper strafe to fill in all these blocks. I find that movement in this one's a little bit of obnoxious, just because how much shifting the camera is doing, where it just catches me off guard quite a bit. But that's another really good example of wrap paper strafing. Here we just utilize dash because it's just a giant circle, so we will go on the outer line of the circle and then just dash around. And then once we reach the end here, we'll just dash into the center of the circle. And then this one is another good one of wrap paper strafing. So we just walk around the perimeter of this area. This also incorporates some hidden tiles, but what we will do is we will just wrap paper strafe around the entire perimeter like I'm doing here, and then we will then go into the rest level by just moving up and just using more strafing to just fill in the tiles up here. And then those little spike tiles you see there, those will kill you if you jump onto them, but walking on them is perfectly normal. And then in that previous level, and then here as well, we'll see ice tiles. These just are, well, ice physics. Just ice physics in this game, which actually do affect items. So we see like the wrap paper going pretty crazy all over the place with the ice tiles, which ends up working in our favor for a good bit, because then we can just throw a bunch of wrap paper around and it'll just start going crazy. So now that we have access to using wrap paper on command, up until World 8, so like all of World 6 and then World 7, this is our primary tool to fill in and cover ground. It's just so good. And then once we get into World 8, then we get the best item in the game at our disposal. But we'll go into that once we actually get to it. So here, again, we'll see more wrap paper strafing. Here I actually did make a bit of a mistake in this level. I should have gone a little bit more to the left there to fill in some tiles, because I ended up having to do some unnecessary backtracking as a result of not going up there a little bit further. So we'll see what I mean by that here. So we drop down here, and then just paint this area as well. So normally I would have completed the level down there, but I had to go back to this area and fill in these tiles. Because I didn't go a little bit further to the right there, I didn't have enough painted to just finish level down there. And then here we do it again, just some more strafing. And then you will see me do occasional uses of the bomb, and that's just because the iframes and then killing problematic enemies. Just getting things out of my way is very important because I don't want to risk messing up. Especially with how fast the run has become, just any single death costs a significant amount of time, so we just want to avoid it anyway. And just using the bomb, it doesn't cost us as nearly as much time as dying does. Then here we get an example of a forced item. So here we get the super jump item, which cannot be replaced. So here, this is a level where we don't have access. Well, technically we can have access to other items if we use the bomb to walk through these kill tiles instead. However, just using the super jump and walking around is proven to be faster, at least at this moment it's been faster than using any other item, because normally you would think, oh, a lot of this looks like straight lines, wouldn't rat paper be great? Switching to the bomb will take the rat paper away from us, so it's a lot more menuing required, so it just ends up being a little bit faster, just stick to the super jump. And this is a level where, for the longest time, I had trouble figuring out a good route for it. And then I just realized, oh, I was wasting so much time. We could just be doing more rat paper strafing here. And so, sure enough, that's what it is. We go up a little bit, then rat paper below, and then we move up, then just rat paper above us, and then just move up to wherever the paper ended, and just resume there. This used to be a level where it took me over a minute to do, and I think now it's down to like 30 seconds. And this one's another one where a lot of it's just straight lines, so we use more rat paper. A lot of their routing done early on was looking at any level that required that, on average, took me about a minute to do. So I would use live split and check whatever levels it took me over a minute to do, and those would be the ones I'd look into doing and replacing. So now we have access to World 8, which gives us the best item in the game, called the Paint Burst, or what we just refer to as the bucket, because the item is just a bucket. What the Paint Burst does is it just spreads out a whole lot of paint around wherever you're standing and fills in tiles, and it will even fill in double tiles. So if a level requires us to backtrack over tiles to change a color a second time, the Paint Burst will cover it and make it the correct color for us. And it is very abusable. So, yep. It creates a sort of like star pattern wherever you use it, and here we can see just how overpowered it is, because it only takes a few of them to complete the level. Yep, so Paint Burst in giant open areas is very useful, and has the main reason why the levels in this world are the ones we do, because it's just wide open areas. And before we really utilized a lot of the rat paper strats, the paint bucket or the paint burst was utilized a whole lot more, to where if you go back and look at some of my runs, I used to go and visit the in-game store to buy a few more paint bursts before the final world, just because we used to use so many of them that I actually would run out. But now we don't use nearly as much, because rat paper strafing in a lot of areas is really good and a lot more useful than just the paint burst. Then here we have these landmines. These are hidden tiles that will only show up once you get close enough to them, and then they will just explode and kill you if you actually touch them. But if you get close enough to them, it'll warn you, and that way you can know to just avoid stepping on the tile. but it does waste some time because getting close to it makes Cerise stop. Like, it slows her down a little bit, and it puts her in a similar state to where if you're on low power and about to backtrack and lose the rest of your power, she just sort of gets like this slow-mo effect where it just wastes time. And so we want to avoid stepping anywhere near any of these landmines to avoid slowing down. But yeah, you get an idea of just how much the paint burst has trivialized this world entirely. And then I didn't mention it, there is an item less category. So this whole time, these items I'm using are through pressing the select button, and then I just can pick an item. The item less run is the same deal, except we don't have access, or you can't use the store-bought items. You are just restricted to whatever items are in the levels. So these two routes are very different because this route is based around whatever items are the best. Now here is a bit of a change I implemented just today. Here I'll actually wrap paper strafe. Normally this is a level where we would just use a bunch of paint bursts to fill in the whole area and just sort of walk around this cube. But I found that it actually is a little bit faster to use with the wrap paper to cover half of the cube and then use the paint bursts for the other half. And then you'll see here, so it saved me 4 seconds doing that differently. This is a level where I ended up losing a bit of time because of pathing mistakes. So a lot of the times that we will use the paint burst here are calculated based on the tile that I'm walking on. But right there, where I jumped onto this tile and died, I needed to use a paint burst a little bit sooner. So I miscalculated, and I should have had one more usage. So right here, I have 6 tiles left, and so this is just wasted time because I forgot to use one right here. So where I jumped and died, I was supposed to use a paint burst right there, then jump over. But I completely spaced it, and so I lost time because of that. This is also a level where I'm still trying to figure out a good route through it. This level is marginally faster than the level I replaced in it, but it is still one of those levels I'm still working on a solid way to go around it, just a solid route for the level itself. But it does make more use of wrap paper strafing, and then we'll just go around, and then we fill in the middle here with another paint burst, and it generally will just finish level for us. Now this is another one where the optimal way to play it is a little bit different, and I think I ended up dying on this level again, but we'd walk into the middle of these areas. Yeah. So right there, you will see me use max power just because I don't want to waste more time than I already have by dying there. But we will go in, use paint burst in the middle. It probably is faster to use wrap paper. It was thought for a bit to be faster to use dashes, but dashes only fill in a straight line, and you have to commit to going to that line, where the wrap paper allows you to move and have a little bit more control. And then here you get an idea of just how much coverage the paint burst really has when we're not working around objects. So this level is just a giant square, so we will just walk around it and then just use a bunch of paint bursts to fill it in. And then now we go into the final world. Until recently, there was a mandatory cutscene that you would watch going into the final world that was about 43 seconds long. With a recent update, the developer allowed us to actually skip the cutscene. So we saved a lot of free time just by being able to skip this cutscene. And then here you will actually see me not do that same sort of skip at the start of these levels. So that transition that you just saw, that's the same thing that I would skip. And I would do that by mashing the retry button on my controller. By mashing the retry, it skips that level intro sequence. But in the final world, you cannot actually skip that intro sequence, because the way that the final world is treated, you don't have the level select that you do from the other worlds, so retrying is treated slightly differently, and so we can't do that same trick. So instead, we have to use the normal way of speeding up that intro sequence, and that is just holding the action button. But the final world, you have max power, you will die if you run out of max power, and you have to fill every level 100% of the way. And so a lot of it is just routing out good pathing, good item usage, and then in this level specifically, a lot of the enemies are very obnoxious, so you'll see me use bomb quite a few times here just to avoid enemies. One of the enemies that I really hate are these like little tiny tack guys. They show up quite a bit, and they move really fast, and they often are the reason why I die in the final world. So I end up using bomb a few times to avoid having to deal with those guys. So yeah, the intro sequence like that is very reminiscent of like Monkey Ball. Like I said, you normally skip it by just mashing the retry button that you have if you bind the retry key. In the final world, we cannot do that, so we have to just hold the action button to skip through and speed it up normally. This is one of the, in my opinion, one of the more notoriously obnoxious levels in the final world. There's a few hidden tiles that are very tricky, or not very tricky, very easy to miss and just catch you off guard. So I've been trying to work in more uses of the paint buckets to avoid missing some of these tiles, because that has cost me a bunch of time in previous runs, just accidentally not like missing one stray tile. And then here's a death purely by accident. Jumping on that tile, you then will make Cerise jump in a direction you're holding. I did not change my direction to a good enough angle, so I made her just fall off the map and cost a bunch of time. And then a mistake with the rat paper also cost time there. And then middle of the stage here, we will just use the paint burst. That one's obnoxious because sometimes those enemies in the middle can troll you and move right as where you're about to land. Because once you're locked into that jump, you cannot change your direction, so you can't change where she's going to fall. You just hope that the enemies don't immediately just walk into wherever you're going to land. And then here, the area is a bunch of straight lines, so we can utilize more of the rat paper. And then we have these little burst tiles that if you walk over them, they'll just fill in areas around them. They don't catch the very far ends, so we want to use the rat paper to fill in those ends. Using items in this level used to be, and in fact in the entirety of the final world, used to be a little bit more risky, because the game used to crash from too many effects being used at once. So some of the tiles will have effects where they create a star when you fill in certain areas, and the items themselves create effects. So the game used to have a problem where it would crash if too many effects had happened on the screen. And specifically, it would crash when finishing the level, because the finishing the level also plays an effect. So the game used to have issues with just basically it was a problem that affected the items run, where you would just crash if you didn't try to space out the effects. And of course, you're trying to go fast, so you're not trying to do that, you're just trying to go fast. So I had lost a ton of runs to just crashing right here in the final few levels. And then the final level itself is just a giant cube. So of course we will just use paint bursts and rat paper to just fill in around it. It does require us to double back, so this is one of those levels where we have to change the color twice. But of course, like I mentioned earlier, both paint burst and rat paper will flip the tiles to the color we need them to be. And then here, I just had to backtrack for this. But with that, the run is done. And that same update where we got to skip that one cutscene, now it finally let us skip the final cutscene here, and then skip the credits, which allowed us to get to the in-game time sooner. because we use the in-game time instead of RTA. And so with that, we have a 34-12. So I hope you all enjoyed watching.